So we will be recording this conversation, and it will be posted on YouTube. Not live, but it will be on our YouTube channel. So if you do ask a question later, just be aware that it'll be recorded. Yep. And I am hoping that we'll have some time for questions, so you can be thinking about that as we move along. So, welcome everyone. I'm really excited to have this conversation with our guests up here, and also with all of you. As I was saying this morning, this idea came out of a class I was taking at Western last semester, which is called Disability in the Church, and it was very helpful for me. I learned a ton, and one of my assignments was to interview a person with a disability about their experience of the church, and so I graciously asked Kevin and Christina if I could interview them, and they were very excited. And we had a great conversation. I learned a ton from them, and I thought, well, they offered. Do you guys remember this? You offered to have the conversation to be interviewed at in my class. Yeah. So because part of our class it had a whole section on I forget what they called it, but people with disabilities, like interviewing them in their own voices. So we watched a bunch of interviews, and so that was one of the reasons they had offered to do that. And so then I thought, well, we could do this at Creston. So then for my final project, I wrote out a paper that included like describing what it would be like, the conversation and the questions. And even though my class is over, we're doing it now. So it's very exciting. I think you guys know, we all know Kevin and Christina. Alan, would you like to maybe just introduce yourself and how you came to be here today?
I'm a friend of Kevin and Christina's. We met online. I live in California. I'm here visiting them. I think they're a spectacular couple, and I enjoy their company, and we share a lot of tech stuff, so I am visiting them.
Great, thanks. So, as we get started here, I thought that just to begin, we would start by talking about language. Disability is a really broad term, something that I learned in my class. It can be defined in a lot of ways, and this is one of the books. It's called Demystifying Disability, and I'm going to put it in the back so you can look through it at the end. But this author describes at least 10 categories of disability, including chronic illnesses, communication disorders, developmental disabilities, hearing, intellectual, learning disabilities, mental health, neurological disorders, physical disabilities, and vision. And I'm sure there are even more. Some of these are more visually apparent than others that you can see when you first meet someone. Some people have been born with a disability, and others acquire it later in life. Partly for this reason, some people identify more strongly with their disability, and others do not. So there's a range of language. So some people use person first language, so putting the person first, for example, saying like I'm a person with a disability, versus like identity first language, which would say a disabled person. So understanding that disability and language, it can be very contextual for each person. And I know I've had this conversation with all these folks here, and I know they're not super picky about it, but I did want to just give them a chance to speak to that, and if you guys have any preferences about language or thoughts in general about that kind of language when we talk about disability. Anybody who wants?
Well, then if I'm going to go first, I'll go first. But remember, the first shall be last. I am a person with a disability. I think when people get goosey about language, they're trying to deal with their own discomfort about it. I would prefer to just say I'm blind because that's what I am. So that's what it is. But I guess there is a point here. You talk about identity. I don't identify strongly with my disability. I think it's important from a functional standpoint for people to understand it. And I think it's important from a psychological standpoint, particularly for someone who is congenital, to understand that if you're going to talk about color, it's meaningless to me. But beyond that, I don't want to spend a lot of time identifying with my disability.
Hi. So I'm one of those people that doesn't really care. If I'm familiar with you, or like you're part of my church family or whatever, I really, really don't care if you say it. However, I know Christina, she's blind, or I know this blind person, Christina. It doesn't bother me either way. It's when I'm unfamiliar with people or people try to I guess label me before they know me. That's when I start to get a little bit, I guess, like the hairs on the back of my neck go up. Know me first, and then we'll sit and have the conversation. But I'm kind of like, so what makes me different from Alan and Kevin is that I have always been legally blind, which means, by the law. But I had working vision for a good chunk of my life till like 2010. So the things like how Alan says he doesn't identify with color necessarily and things like that, that is important to me. I recognize that and I remember it. And so I have what I call visual memory. So that's where I don't necessarily completely identify with blindness. I know I'm blind. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not hiding it from anything or anyone. But I'm just me. I've always just been me. So that's kind of how I look at it.
So I'm in the same camp. I will also say that we do not, cannot, will not, should not speak for everyone in our community. There are folks who their introduction to blindness, their journey through blindness, whatever, was a hellish traumatic experience because of their surroundings or the way they were treated, and they don't see this the way we do. We're privileged to see this the way we do. That's our privilege because a lot of us have had struggles, yes, but then we were, we happened to be around people that were influencing us to look at this a certain way. But when you are not in our shoes, like as a blind person, and you happen to live a very underserved, shut-in lifestyle, you do not see it this way. You will completely potentially identify with your disability because it is the one thing that you feel that holds you back because you don't know any different. So we say this in kind of this nonchalant, blind, whatever, a bunch of our compatriots agree with us. A bunch of our compatriots would be saying the same thing. But then there are those who would not.
Thank you. So I'm hearing that it is very contextual. Do you guys agree with that for each person? Yeah. And I know when we talked, you guys are like, just ask, right? That you can ask the person. Yeah. Okay. I want to stay on this topic of language because I think it's important to start with the language that we use, and that when we understand our language, then it helps us, to be able to communicate. And so many times when someone who's non-disabled encounters a person, particularly with a visible disability that we can see, or even sometimes when you learn of someone's non-apparent disability, it can make that person, the non-disabled person, feel kind of uncomfortable. I don't know if any of you have had that experience. But I know we talked about that, Kevin and Christina, a little bit in our conversation. And it can kind of result in you maybe not knowing what to say to the person or how to talk to them. In our class, the disability scholar, his name is Eric Carter, and he said that our primary barrier in interacting with someone with a disability is hesitancy. So we end up not saying or doing anything, like not even talking to the person. So we're going to get to ableism in a minute, but for now, why do you guys think that people sometimes freeze up or feel kind of uncomfortable or aren't sure what to say? Has anybody had experiences with this or thoughts?
So this is an issue of responsibility, I think. And Kevin and Christina may disagree with me a little bit on this one. I'm older than they are. And I don't mean that in terms of pulling rank, but I mean in the sense that the culture has changed greatly. I view it as my responsibility to make anybody as comfortable as I possibly can. Now, I can only go so far, but I think there are many. We are a polyglot. We are a very, very different population. And humans want to generalize an experience. So if they have an experience with one person, they assume that that will be consistent with all people. In the 1980s, one of the organizations for the blind had a big thing about airlines, and they didn't want to have special assistance when in fact they needed it. And they made the airline people very uncomfortable, and they were making the problem worse. So in my view, yes, there is the isolation factor, particularly in blindness, because you're only able to respond to people who initiate a conversation. But once the conversation is initiated, as far as I'm concerned, it's my responsibility to do everything in my power to make you comfortable. And that could include humor. That could include finding common ground. It is not uncommon for people to feel hesitant. And if I can get them to take the first step, then it's my job to make the next 5 easy, if that makes any sense.
I guess I'll go. We'll just keep the same pattern. How about that, guys? So we're not worried about it. All right. I think people fear what they can't understand. And I think Kevin and I kind of agree on this. If you've never experienced blindness, even for a little bit, it's scary. And you don't know how to interact with somebody who experiences that every day. I do agree with you, Alan, actually. I think once the first interaction has been made, and trust me, I've walked into a room and felt like I didn't exist, and that sucks. I want people to reach out. I'm very much on the edge of introvert and extrovert. I'm kind of right in the middle. And so I'm most likely not going to be that person to reach out. But the second someone reaches out to me, I can open up very quickly, and as long as I'm comfortable. And if that means I have to, make, as Alan said, those next 5 steps super comfortable for that person, and then, now we got this really good conversation going, and it's comfortable, and it's normal, and it's relaxed, and we're in the normal space that everybody interacts in, then we're good to go, you know, and I'm just as open. So yeah, I do agree with you, Alan. That is kind of how I feel too. Once we've made the connection, we should try to make that easy for people, because we do recognize that, you know, it is difficult for an able-bodied, and I don't like that term, but someone without a disability to reach out and talk to somebody who has one. So when they do, I'm going to champion it, you know what I mean? So there you go.
I guess we are going to have this pattern. It's like a songwriter round. We just kind of go down the row. So I'm in agreement with these guys. I tend to use irreverent satire when I can get away with it, to be really disarming. And so I've been known to be doing the piano bar gig, and I've been known to say something like, hey, check this out. If you are trying to get my attention and I'm not responding, I promise I'm not a douche. Come up and say hello, please. I just can't see you from back there. You know, and so I'm okay with this kind of thing, because then people realize, oh, okay, this is not anything, right? And then people can come up to you and talk to you. And so I tend to be really, disarming, and I think comfortability is key. You're absolutely right. And then when people feel like they're comfortable with a situation, then they can just kind of talk to you. And so, and I think going on the concept of what we don't know is a thing that kind of scares us as humanity. There was a poll done at some point that was like, people rated blindness as a greater fear than cancer. And so, because I think when you learn about the dark, you are kind of, there's just an archetype of what darkness is, right? And so then people understand that as being, well, lack of sight, then, blindness or whatever. And so then A goes to B goes to C, and it becomes this kind of unintentional Rube Goldberg machine that kind of rolls, and then people just sort of develop an ideal about something, and then that's either fear, to where they don't really know what to do, and they're just, completely kind of flummoxed by the whole thing, and are very uncomfortable, because it's like they potentially just couldn't imagine life in that regard, and so then it's more projection of fear than anything else.
I have one other thought that might be relevant. The dog, I have not used a dog most of my life, but the dog is three things. It is mobility, it is therapy, and I didn't like that idea when I first got her, but more than anything else, it's a bridge, because everybody knows and loves dogs, and it creates an opening that you don't necessarily have when you have a cane. So that's, I think, an important thing to recognize.
Let's talk about ableism. So ableism has been defined in a lot of different ways. I've heard it described kind of broadly as discrimination and prejudice against people with disabilities. Also, I've heard it described as a belief that disabled people are less valuable or less human than our non-disabled counterparts. Or another definition, a system of assigning value to people's bodies and minds based on societally constructed ideas of normalcy. So what's normal? Productivity, desirability, intelligence, excellence, and fitness. So like we have this ideal body, right? And we think this is what we're trying to achieve, or this is what is normal. Can you guys help us understand maybe when you think of ableism, what this means? And have you experienced it, or people you know experienced it? Can you share some examples?
I really am trying to get out of talking about politics, but it's impossible to respond to this one without touching that rail. We are blessed to live in a country that has provided incredible resources for us to live normal lives, and those are under assault. And I think many within our community don't recognize it. And I think it stems from this very idea that is a part of your question about less valuable. There is no doubt in my mind that in the mind of many people, we are less valuable. And as it relates specifically to the church, I have had some real challenges finding a place where I can make a contribution. I love what this church is doing for Kevin and Christina. And partially because they have a place, they can make a contribution. That's more important than that you give to them necessarily. I mean, I'm not saying that you're not giving something to them. You're giving them something tremendously valuable. But it's not a one-way street. And if it's a one-way street, that, the church is only, we're nice people, we're only helping, then it's about being powerless, and it's about being valueless. So the best thing I can say relative to the church, and maybe the hardest thing, is when you have a disabled person, finding a place where they can serve is the number one most valuable thing the church can do to bring us along. And conversely, not having a place to serve or rejecting an offer to serve is the most castrating, if I can be so vile, thing that the church can do.
All right. The big A. Ableism. Admittedly, I did not necessarily understand this concept till a few years ago. Yet now that I understand it, I see it a lot. I mostly see it in employment of fellow blind people, or I should say the lack of employment when it comes to fellow blind people. And Kevin, I'm going to steal your thunder, sorry, because it's my best story. We have several friends, one in particular that has about 2 or 3 master's degrees. Very intelligent person, very well-spoken, but has not just blindness, but a few other disabilities that go with it. And they could walk into a job interview and be overly qualified. And a sighted person would get the job. And it's sad. It actually makes me sound like I'm wavering right now thinking about it. Because they put in the work, if not a heck of a lot more. Because school is hard. When you're going through school as a blind person, it's, I like to say that the hour worth of homework your kids might have is probably about 3 hours of homework for a blind person. Or, anybody that might have a disability that they got to work through stuff. So yeah, that person that has, 3 master's degrees probably put in many, many more years of work to get those degrees, many more hours than the person with the 1 degree that the job hires. And that's the biggest space that I see ableism all around. There's a couple other spaces, and hopefully Kevin will pick up the ball that I'm gonna drop and and carry it to the goal. So I'm gonna pass it over to him.
So I think ableism shows its head in different places in completely different ways. I'm not going to use the word unforeseen or unintentional ableism because we've figured out pretty quickly that not having a way, if you have a medical office that has like a touch screen or something that you have to sign in on, and everybody else can discreetly walk up and sign in and poke on the screen what they're there to see somebody for, but then somebody else who is either dyslexic. So I'm even burying the blind lead here, right? So dyslexic, unable to, maybe doesn't have the motor skills to touch the touch screen. I mean, anything's possible, right? So now they've got to shout to the world an incredible HIPAA violation, right? What they're doing, why they're there. And then the people behind them are not listening in, but now this person is unwillingly having to not be discreet when everybody else can. Now, we're not going to say that that's unintentional ableism or unforeseen ableism because we've already seen this happen. But 15, 20 years ago, we should have been hitting our foreheads going, oh, maybe we should do something, but we still really haven't, right? So maybe it is intentional. I don't know. But I think ableism in the church, look, when you go on Facebook and you read something a couple weeks ago that says something like, special needs children are God's way of reminding us that there are still angels. So essentially what you've done is you've applied, well, first of all, what you've done is you have made this person super subhuman. So you've put them on a pedestal, but yet you've taken away their independence and their dignity, but you kind of put them in this kind of Superman state because you're enamored with it somehow, right? But what you've also done is there's part of small town philosophy on the part of folks with disabilities where I always say the smaller the town, the more superstition. And so there is a small town mentality that it's like, no, it's okay for you to be over here because the Lord will just provide you with these people who will come and help you, because what those people are doing is they want to feel needed, so they'll come and do things for you, and it's trickle-down economics for the disabled. I have no understanding of this concept. It's like it's not even where people are, each person is pulling their weight for the other human being. It's like, just kind of be, the inspiration, right? And then people will be. So that's the kind of ableism that exists in different, parts of the United States and the world. And then obviously the employment where, we are, you have an individual who doom scrolls Facebook in the morning and cries in their coffee when they see, some blind individual on The Voice or doing something, tying their shoe. I don't know what it is. And they're just so enamored and so blessed to have watched that just made their day. They cried in their coffee. And then they turn around the next day and they say to a prospective employee, we're just so we're so blessed that you came in here. We just think that's so courageous and wonderful, and you're overqualified. I mean, you've got like these 2 master's degrees, but you might trip over a trash can. So what happens is these folks become a pedestal, and they become delicate, and they become breakable. And for all the wrong reasons. Because guess what? We are delicate and breakable human beings, right? But these people are being looked at as being delicate and breakable for all of the wrong reasons. And so then just ableism runs rampant. And it's again a projected thing. It's a projected sense of what all of this is.
Yeah, in our class, they used the term inspiration porn. Yeah. Like looking at someone with a disability as like your inspiration, like just because they exist with the disability, that's like Kevin said, like, oh, we're cheering for you just because you got up in the morning, it's like, well, they are very fully capable human beings, right? Like we're not really seeing their dignity in just being a human being, right? We're like defining them and using them really as our inspiration. So, would you say that's?
Yes. Okay. That's very much the.
I don't want to jump ahead of you here, but I think the story in John 8 or John 9, I should have checked before I said. I think it's John 8. But about the person born blind is an amazingly interesting story for a couple of reasons. One, in this particular story, as I recall, Jesus offers the healing. The blind person doesn't view himself as pitiful. Two, more to the point, he's not infantilized. When the Jewish rulers are trying to determine what happened, and they ask his parents, the parents say, he is an adult. He can speak for himself. That is really now getting to what should happen, because so often our ability to speak for ourselves is taken away. So often people will not talk to me. They'll talk to whoever I'm with about me. And that is just, dehumanizing. So, anyhow.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. Christina, did you want to add anything about ableism that Kevin might have missed?
I think I'm good.
Okay. Okay. Can always come back. Let's turn to church specific now. Alan's kind of got us started here. Can you guys speak to some of either your own personal experiences or people close to you with disabilities, their experiences in the church? Those might be positive, they might be negative, neutral. What are some of maybe the supports or the barriers to support that you've seen or experienced?
Number one, I think size. I'm an old man. I was born in the 1950s, and my dad was a pastor in the Lutheran faith, and churches were smaller. And a church like this has the ability to know their people. I think in the mega churches, it's hopeless because the pastors don't have time or a slot. It's a machine, and it's like so many other machines. We have a plan as long as you fit this particular set of specifications, this size, this whatever. So I think many of us have difficulty finding a good church home. And this is not on your list of questions, but I think a discussion of disability probably also needs to include a discussion of significant relationship, as in marriage, or significant person in their life, because my wife and I have been married for 41 years, and my wife is fully sighted, but we have a lot of difficulty finding a comfortable place in a church because she is seen too often as my support and not as an individual. So there's this struggle to be individual members autonomous of each other and also be a couple, which I think is common for all couples in a church. But I think for when one member of the couple is disabled, and particularly if it's a severe disability or if it's a new condition that they're learning to deal with as in older people, this is a real challenge. And giving the disabled person the ability to function apart from their spouse is important.
So I'm going to hit this from two different angles. My experiences when it comes to church have been mostly good, like my own personal experiences. I was raised Catholic. I went to Catholic school till 6th grade. That had its own challenges, and that's the first one I'm going to hit on. As much as I think separation of church and state is a good thing, when you are the only disabled person in a Catholic school, it is very debilitating. I could not get any assistance that I needed unless it was donated or volunteered by an individual or a group of people. So at the time I needed some specific technology so I could see my books. Luckily, it was donated to the school and I was able to, do what I needed to do. But I was one person. I don't know many people with disabilities that actually attend private schools because they cannot get services. So that's the first thing. And that's all I have to really say on that thing, because it's what it is. When it came to my church experiences, I was very welcomed and treated as, the child of, a church-going family, a very active church-going family, and treated quite well. My story is not the normal in a lot of circumstances, and Kevin will give some more examples of that, I'm sure, because he knows a lot more people than I do. But I've heard horror stories. When I left church as a teenager, I never left church, by the way. I don't want to put it that way, but when I stopped being a active participant, that's a better way of putting it. I would go to places like fairs and street things and whatever where, churches are out, doing their thing, trying to bring people in and just be part of it. And that's great. I love it. It's a good thing. We want to be part of community. But when you're the blind person walking by that booth, let me tell you, I started to hold my breath, because the first things that would happen is, ooh, blind person. And I'm talking for the sighted people, and I'm not trying to offend anybody here, because you guys are not these people. I've been here long enough to know you guys are not these people. But there has been the, ooh, blind person, let's pray for them. Come here, blind person. Let's put our hands on you. Let's pray for you. Let's make your life better by our healing words. And that gets rough to the point that, I actually stopped going to local fairs or went with a sighted person that could make sure I didn't accidentally walk by that booth. That's where my church hurt kicks in. Not my own personal experiences with the churches I've been a part of, but the ones that just don't know. So that's kind of where I sit with it.
So I am one of the privileged ones who happened to be part of church communities that when people put their hands on me, it was because we were actually praying for a situation. Most of my life, most of the time, I've been very privileged to be with people who, even in charismatic circles, if people were putting hands on me, it was because we were praying for something that was actually going on in my life. None of those people were interested in, they had no interest in this healing thing. They were interested in me as an individual, and they loved me as an individual and all of me. And so they were interested in the whole person of who I was. And so when people were putting hands on me in those situations, it was for those kinds of things. But I think if we're going to speak like a victor, then are we able to also speak for the victim, right? And so I do know people who are absolutely damaged. They have been humiliated, intentionally or otherwise, in ways that I cannot, that I cannot understand. So, as somebody who can speak like a victor to a degree in this sense, I will speak all the time for the victims, the folks who will never at this moment set foot in churches because of where the trauma points lie. So I'm so blessed to have worked with people throughout my life who, didn't they didn't put this kind of pressure or trauma on me, and so I'm using their willingness to treat me as a whole person. I'm actually using that as positive ammunition to help those who can't or who don't have this. And so I was blessed, I was bolstered, and I'm using it to, I'm trying to use it to the advantage of the disadvantaged. And I mean disadvantaged in a sense of folks who weren't so lucky. And so we just try to amplify those voices and let them know as many times as we can, people in our community, that that they are seen and they are loved. And so that's kind of where I'm at with this. I hope I didn't ramble too much or take a rabbit trail, but
I think it's really fascinating that Heather talked this morning about the Good Samaritan, and I gather that Heather is in her 30s or 20s, and
very nice. Very well played.
will preach many more sermons in her life. But when you talk about the Good Samaritan, it is a story about power when you think about it, and the powerlessness of the person who was attacked. Who responds to that powerlessness, and is there an attempt to create a parallel? And one of the things I'm absolutely convinced about Christianity is it is not a hierarchy. I don't give a flying floozy what the Catholic Church or other organized churches may say. It is not a hierarchy. It is a relationship with a personal relationship with Christ that the church is synergizing. That's what it is. And the more we create a parallel relationship with one another, I think the more we are serving God. And Christina's going to slap me for this, but I don't really understand how someone can be right-wing in their political views and claim that that's based in Christianity. It doesn't make sense to me.
I'm gonna add to the sermon today a little bit, because we were talking about this earlier. what I always found interesting, and it just kind of reaffirmed it today and then going over these questions again, is that it was the least suspected person that helped. And let's turn that to the disability discussion. We can help. We might be the least suspected person, but you know what? Because of our life experiences and the challenges that we've maybe had to deal with, we tend to try to be the first, like Kevin said, to reach the hand out or to make others feel seen. And I think that's important to remember, is that it is the people you don't necessarily suspect that are the helpers. And now that I said that, I am a huge fan of Mr. Rogers, and I have to say this, and Mr. Rogers will say this all day and said this till the day he passed. Look for the helpers. There's always a person that is willing to help. Look for them. So, there you go.
Thanks. And Kevin, I want to return to what you were saying for a minute, because I think this goes along with what the two of you guys are saying. Because I remember in our conversation, our first conversation when I interviewed you guys, you talked quite a bit about your family kind of empowering you as a youth. Yes. Can you speak a little bit about that, and maybe like versus like maybe some of the other people that you know, like not being empowered? And because I think that's kind of what, Christina, that goes along with kind of what you were saying too, of just like, you know, everyone has gifts, right? Everyone has gifts to bring, and I think I hope I'm not taking what you're going to say, but you know, if we are empowering each other, then you know there's a place for everyone. Everyone can bring their gifts, but if we're not, then we're not going to see that, right? So, Kevin, can you speak to that a little? Your experience.
I think I can illustrate my family with a couple of very short, kind of bullet-pointed anecdotes. When you live in when you live with a family who, in the morning, in a nice summer morning, they tell me, "So, just want to let you know, we're building a deck. This is the day. We're building a deck. If you go out this door, just letting you know you're stepping into nothing, because we are what? We're building a deck." Okay, no problem. So the day continues whilst they're building a deck. And I had gotten a couple of fairly good grades on a report card, which then granted me a couple of dollars, which I was, as a 9-year-old, you're quite excited to show other people. So why don't we go and show the people who are building a deck? So we go out to tell them, "Hey guys, I want to," as we step into the void of nothing, and we fall about, 3.5 feet. And the comment that was made as I'm like sheepishly getting up from doing a thing that, oh, that's right, they did tell me, didn't they? And the comments from the peanut gallery were, "I think it's really impressive that you can fall, but then none of those dollars ended up in the dirt. That you are a champion." Okay? That's the discussion that was had, and we all laughed it off because nobody was hurt. The dollars weren't even hurt. And so, and I think my comment was something to the, "Man, I hate when I forget things," or whatever, you know. That's kind of the world I lived in, you know. I fell out of a motorhome once because I stepped on the very edge of, you know, it's like the rectangular thing that, like the plastic step stool that you'd stand on, like a rectangular squatty potty. They use them for, the bottom of a motorhome. And I literally just toppled right out of the thing and did a 1.5 gainer and ended up on the driveway. But the lead I'm burying is the comment was made, if you wouldn't text while walking, that probably wouldn't happen again, which they're not wrong on both accounts. And that was the era of the Nokia candy bar phone where you're going 222, 555, 619, and I'm not even fast at that to begin with. So yes, I was texting while walking. I deserved to fall out of that motorhome. That's kind of the world I lived in. And so I take that bolstering and use it as a means of saying, yeah, we've got to empower people, because I know what it feels like to be empowered. I also know what it feels like to be powerless. So then where can I take my empowerment that I was given and be able to kind of slop that over into the cups of the powerless?
All right, and for our last question, and then I'm going to open it up, so be thinking. And we've kind of gone here already, which is great, but we'll come back again to our theology. So, for either better or worse, how do you guys think that our theology in the church shapes how we treat each other, including our members with disabilities? And then a secondary question, which you can also answer, either one. And this kind of goes along, but how do you view healing narratives in the Bible? And Alan, you've touched on this a little bit as well, but so either question, theology, healing.
Number one, I completely identifying with what Christina said about not wanting somebody to think that I need to be fixed and that they have the power to fix me through their faith. That is a profaning of the gospel, I think. Number two, I have no doubt that Jesus was real. And I have no doubt that healing happened in his time. But I sometimes wonder if we don't treat the Bible, if we treat the Bible too much as a static rather than a dynamic thing, and we don't know the whole story, and what was left out may be as important as what was included. So I think the healing narratives proved Jesus' power, but I think the analogies that were often used, like the blind leading the blind and so forth, we take ourselves too seriously if we get hurt feelings about them. The truth is, Kevin and Christina and I will lead each other around in various ways, but we do lack certain information. And I love the old hymn, take my life and let it be dedicated, Lord, to thee. And I wouldn't have chosen to have the disability that is used to show God's greatness, but take my life and let it be dedicated, Lord, to thee. It's not mine to do. It's his to do. So I think from a theology standpoint, or more specifically from a Christian theology standpoint, we often miscommunicate when we aren't cognizant of the time period that is being discussed. Jesus' time was a time of healing. There is no, with no disrespect meant to Catherine Kuhlman, although I hear somebody brought her a ham to cure one time. Okay, that didn't go over too well. A ham to cure? Okay, yeah. Okay. The bad. Okay, but the point is, I don't really think that demonstrates faith in this day. I think dealing with life's hardships and supporting one another and living parallel lives, that demonstrates the glory of God. So anyhow.
Um, I have a few things to say. I'm going to start with the first thing that came to mind when I read a Facebook post a week ago from somebody I sort of know who said something on the lines of they were ridiculed or treated this way in a church. They are blind. And basically told that they either needed the demons prayed out of them or that they were punished for this, and I'm going to put it in these terms, for the sins of their fathers. Their blindness was the sins of their fathers. That's heavy. I don't believe that. I don't think any of you guys believe that, so I think we're good. But that when people are told that, wow, ouch, that hurts. The second thing, when it comes to the Bible, you know, I was a little kid. Like I said, grew up Catholic from day one. So as a child, I saw as a child, and I was all about Jesus. Make me better. Because that's all I saw, right? Jesus healed the blind, made the cripples walk. So I'm like, oh, I'm blind. I get this. I'm going to be as good of a, Catholic girl as I can be at 5. And maybe one day I'll be healed, which of course now we know one day I will be, but not in the sense of what I thought at 5. And then we get older and we realize that these are examples. Well, no, we got to go through the other process. Why am I not healed? Why hasn't he healed me? Why hasn't somebody come down and made me better? I'm doing good. I'm trying. That was hard to go through that process at, we'll just say 7. 8, 9, 10 comes along, you start to kind of learn what's really going on in the Bible. And, these are, examples of faith and examples of God's power working through Jesus and thus and such and all the things. And you realize that, okay, and then you learn, about the next life and that you will be healed. Keep doing good. And so I got okay with it. We're reading a book very slowly called My Body Is Not a Prayer Request. There you go. And the very first chapter, which we did get through. No, we got through a good amount, actually. But the very first chapter, I'm really bad at quoting verse and such, so bear with me. But essentially, Jesus heals a blind man from a city, a town. And he goes back and he's happy. He's praising the Lord for healing him, making him whole, or whatever his words are. And he's shunned by his community. The community that he existed in just hours before. And maybe wasn't the most accepted because, they may not have completely understood him, but they understood him in the sense of his blindness and worked within that framework. But then the flip happened. And now he could see these people, and they did not know what to do. And it did not go so great for him, let's just say. And I don't know all the, actual words in scripture of it, but that's the part of the stories we don't see when a lot of times when We're just going to church as regular participants. We see the good stories. Made the blind man see, the cripple walk, raised people from the dead, all those things. We see all that. Woohoo. But what was the aftermath? We don't know. And it's there, but we don't get that all the time in general practitioner. So there you go.
So every single one of us in this room has woken up on any day of the week and watched the blind leading the blind in the biblical sense. So prime examples of the blind leading the blind is being in I kind of use like the kind of the story of anybody know have a weird Uncle Frank who's got like sort of can play an instrument and has like maybe 4 Radio Shack mics that don't really work, and he's got a band of buddies, and they invite you, maybe they invite you to their little concert that they're giving in their garage, right? And you being, anybody in this room who's probably known what a microphone is and how a microphone works, and you're watching these guys fight over the mic, but you gotta plug it. No, what you gotta do, and then suddenly what happens is the solo cup of beer gets spilled into the mixer, and the cigarette ashes now in the faders, and it doesn't work anymore. And you're kind of sitting there watching this whole thing go down. Oh, poor Uncle Frank. I'm sorry, But those were, in the biblical sense, the blind leading the blind, right? In a sense of 2 people who were completely, unfortunately, not immune to the Dunning-Kruger effect. If you know what that is, it's the people who think they're an expert on a thing and are so much so thinking they're an expert on a thing that they are actually not an expert on a thing. And you watch this unfold on Facebook in multiple instances. Christina and I watched this on like the Elisis drum and percussion, electronic drum and percussion group, where we learn a lot about the piece of equipment that's up there on the stage, the drum kit. But what we see sometimes is somebody posting a thing, and then we watch the bad advice roll in. And we go, no, please do not tell them to do that. Please do not tell them to do that. Todd goes to his IT job, right? And probably is watching 2 people who are probably not so qualified to do a thing give advice to someone else who is not so qualified to do a thing, and he's powerless to fix that. Please do not tell them to do that. Please. Okay. So those are prime examples of the blind leading the blind. Another prime example of the blind leading the blind is a less than qualified, less than confident blind person trying to lead what could considerably be a group of maybe more qualified, more confident blind people through a treacherous space where somebody ends up falling down the flight of stairs, right? And it is usually the less than qualified, underconfident blind person that was, again, not immune to the Dunning-Kruger effect. Now, in our world, what we see in our space, what happens when you have the blind leading the blind, is a lot of people are pretty mindful of what the other is capable of. Alan can walk to this church from the Hampton Inn on Dudley. He did it twice. You guys don't know that. But I will tell you straight up, when this occurs again in the summer at some point, and it happens to be where Christina and I are willing or unwitting or unwilling or unwitting participants of this whole thing, we will defer to Alan and say, how did this work? Because now it's not the blind leading the blind anymore. You see how this works, right? And so, like, the whole blind leading the blind thing is rampant in culture. Everywhere you go, the guy that told your buddy to go get the car fixed at the place that did not, blind leading the blind, right? But the blind can also lead the blind. He knows how to do it. I know how to navigate Christina through an airport when we're, at times when we're not necessarily getting assistance, maybe when before we're getting, because I will defer to her if she wants assistance, because it's a long day. That's okay. Alan and I can potentially do it with certain like AI services and maybe go and get some assistance or ask the right questions or whatever. We kind of know how to do that. But if I'm with Christina and she's like, I'd prefer maybe to get assistance. When my dog died and I flew back to Michigan from Chicago, she asked me, would you be okay with getting assistance throughout the day? Because I know your brain is probably not necessarily in a place that you can potentially deal with that bandwidth. So what do you think I did? I had assistance that whole day because it was for the comfort of someone else. It was who was blind. It wasn't a sighted person asking me to take assistance. It was another blind person who's like, maybe that might be a good idea. So now it's no longer the blind leading the blind. It's people with certain qualifications and whether they get them from their 10,000 hours or the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours, or they get them from a degree, or they get them from whatever. Somebody else like myself deferring to somebody like them, right? So that's kind of I was kind of taken by the blind leading the blind conversation, and I was like, yeah, we kind of see this every day. Y'all see it every single day of your lives. I see it. So it's not necessarily a healing narrative, but it's probably a healing narrative if you can think of it in the original biblical sense and then change your mind and see it somewhere else. That was a healing narrative then, I believe. So there you go.
Thank you. All right, we're going to open it up to anyone who has a question. There's a mic actually set up over here. So if you can come to the mic, because then the recording can hear it. Yes. Okay. And maybe say your name, just because Heather would like that.
One name, very fast.
Preferably your name.
Chris Strobosher. So thrilled and weirded out to find out that I'm married to a 30-year-old. Our kids are going to be more weirded out. When I had a cousin. We were born very close to the same time, I think within days. He was born blind, I was born sighted. And we grew up together. My uncle and my dad were very, very close because of some pretty powerful reasons. So we grew up together, and we spent a lot of time together, and I'm sure I asked a lot of dumb questions. I'm sure Bruce answered a lot of dumb questions. But we kind of figured things out. There were things that we couldn't do. We obviously We weren't going to go throw a ball and kick a ball and this kind of stuff, but we could play trucks, and we could fill sand into trucks, and he could take me into the barn, and he could tell me how to tell the difference between a Hereford and a Holstein, and we'd go through and you touch your faces, and he taught me that you don't touch the bull, and I remember that distinctly. You do not touch the bull. And there are lots of things that we couldn't do, and there are lots of things that we could do, and our parents were engaged in that, and that we could take guitar lessons together, and we learned guitar together. We could take piano lessons together, and Bruce would learn how to play piano very well, and I would learn to suck. But I would learn an appreciation for great piano in the future. And there was all kinds of things that we could do. They bought a tandem bike so that two young boys could feel the wind in their faces as they go biking. And I think eventually, it's hard to remember the things accurately. I think eventually the differences kind of went away until, and Alan, I love what you said, in a bigger group, it becomes difficult. We then went to school. We started school, and then the differences started popping up. And then I would go and play with the people who did kick a ball and throw a ball, and Bruce didn't. And I like to think that I stayed with him and did things with him. I think I did. But eventually it just wouldn't work anymore, and Bruce went off to a school, a blind school, and he became a really great piano player. But I love the idea or the thought or that time period where the differences weren't near as important as to what we could do together. My parents recognized that. What can we do? Lots of things we can't do. What can we do? I didn't even notice it. So we played piano, we played guitar, we did these musical things, we did all these things. And it was when we got into a larger group, and now, and I love it, that in a smaller group you say it's more possible to make this work in a smaller group than it is a larger group, because in the larger group, that's where things kind of fell apart. And then that's where the separations became more evident. So tonight, I am asking you, and obviously, I mean, this is not the blind leading the blind. This is everybody leading everybody, right? And Kevin, your story is to that. Everybody leads somebody, and somebody leads somebody in a different capacity. To look at the things, what can we do? And I've become a little deaf to what we can do, and I look at the difficulties, but and you guys to speak to us freely, what can we do? And maybe like a boy, I ask dumb questions, and maybe you got to answer dumb questions, and eventually that stops. But what are the things that we can do together, and just have that special time together that's maybe possible in this area. It's not a question so much as just an encouragement. Or I can ask you, what can we do? What are things that we can do that strike your mind?
In this area specifically, I think you've got a great start here. I think anytime you can find a skill that someone has and they have an opportunity to bring that skill to your community, whether that skill is counseling, whether that skill is teaching, whether that skill is music, or whether that skill is janitorial, then you are really creating a ministry opportunity. I'm kind of an intellectual snob. I mean, I'm not very patient with people who are not terribly bright. And I hate to say that because it's going against everything I said earlier. But if you find someone like that and they can be a great church janitor, that needs to be celebrated, So my thought would be, if you're interested in, as a church, the disabled population, find an opportunity for us to serve, and you will have people flocking to you. Particularly if that service doesn't mean that the service, that the overall service that the church is offering is degraded in any way. It should be enhanced. So find that, not only giving them an opportunity, but find what they do well. And that's not an easy thing to do.
I welcome all the dumb questions. We don't learn if we're not asking. So, and admittedly, not all blind people or people with disabilities are as welcoming. But I am. So there you go. Ask the questions. Ask, what can we do? Like you just said. Even if it feels stupid, like, do you need help with something? Ask. Just ask. And like I said earlier, look for the helpers. They're under your noses. There you go.
So I would say all of this, and then I would say we can say all day long the cliche of disability is on a spectrum and all of that, but it's actually, there's a lot of truth to that. And so there are things that Christina is absolutely not comfortable with. Like, you do this thing because when I do it, I feel, see it, and those are I statements. Those aren't anybody else cutting her down. She'll say, I feel like when I do this, it either never works or it either completely, I'm just completely, it could be like an anxiety-ridden thing. And then there are things where, I'm kind of the same, but on a completely different end of the spectrum. Like she's, there are physical things that she's really comfortable with, and I'm the dorky kid with the body dysphoria that really doesn't trust my body to do anything on time, and so it has nothing to do with blindness. It has everything to do with feeling like being kind of slow in a klutz, and that's how I've always felt. So there are things where I'm like, if you do that, I may not, I may feel more comfortable. So essentially, it's like everybody's kind of riding this thing a little bit differently, and everybody's kind of using different vehicles to get where they need to go, I think. And so there are things that probably I should be comfortable with, and sometimes maybe it's Christina going, no, come on, you actually can do that, you realize this, right? I mean, that's like a thing. And so you can bolster each other's abilities, and and maybe sometimes I might bolster too much in a way where I'm like, yes, you can, you just don't try. And that's when you start shoulding all over people. You should do this. Then that becomes less encouraging and more disempowering, discouraging. But all of this is really, we all welcome. I mean, I welcome the dumb questions too. I mean, but it's really just kind of knowing that, like, some people are battling another thing that someone else is kind of have victory over, and it just really is kind of on a spectrum, and you just kind of see, I'm the guy that's going to get lost really quickly out in the snow. I can't maneuver very well. Christina's got a really, really good mental map of a lot of things. So there's things that I will just completely turn the wrong way. Just what it is. She won't. So that's where, that's where that might be on a thing, and so it is really just ask, really, and it's all good. We just kind of figure it out. We do the thing, and there it is.
This is Heather.
Okay.
Oh, were you going to say
I was
something?
just going to say we've got about 10 minutes left. So looks like we have 2 more questions here. So just keep that in mind and try to be concise. Okay.
So this is Heather, and I'm 55. And this question is maybe more specific to Creston and worship. We talked about color earlier on, and this morning I referenced purple, and we at Creston are very interested in being welcoming and hospitable and making sure that we are a hospitable community. And then I mentioned something like purple because we are trying to, our kids look at the Advent calendar and the seasons and liturgical seasons and all of this, and instantly mindful, well, we can't all see purple and we can't all see the banners. So I move into this explanation about the banners as an attempt to be hospitable. And then I'm wondering, how are you, is this a hospitable thing, or is this just extra? Or I'm trying to do something that is helpful that might not even be needed or helpful. So I'm curious if you can respond to any or all of that.
For Christina, purple is meaningful. For Kevin and I, purple is not meaningful. For me, I don't want you to change what you're doing, and I don't want you to try to add an explanation. I had somebody once be very upset when I told them I didn't know anything about color. And she went away and she came back about 15 minutes. She said, I can describe yellow to you. It's the color of an egg yolk. That kind of logic, is why people are uncomfortable. And, you don't want to make fun of them for it, but it's hard not to laugh at them. My thought would be, don't change anything you're doing. If you normally talk about it, then talk about it. And I will get, what is there. I mean, some seed falls in the weeds and some seed falls in the good soil.
Yep. So I actually appreciate when you describe things. You don't have to go crazy, because I don't want to make people uncomfortable or feel like they're out of their comfort zone. Your description of the footsteps or the moving towards the crosses, that was it. That was perfect this morning, and that was all I needed. Wednesday's service, however, and we might need to have this discussion at a later time, but when we do services where it is like drawing pictures and stuff like that, Kevin might not necessarily care. Alan might not necessarily care. However, even though I could engage with the concepts of what was going on and hearing everybody's description of the picture and this and that, and make my own assumptions of what the picture was, because I have visual memory, I did actually feel, and not in a bad way, so don't take this bad, but I felt left out. And I felt left out because not of anything that was done here, but because almost a sense of, it reminded me a little bit of what I've lost. I was very artistic as a teenager, and so when it comes to art and things like that, it does bring me kind of to this space of, dang, that sucks. So in a way it did, but again, I understand the process and I understand what it was for, and so I can still engage in it, but maybe we can sit down one day and talk about what a service might look like if it is a more like art, dealing with the visual side of things kind of service. So there you go.
So I think, exactly what these guys have said. Also, I think, I don't want to use the word. I think it's easy for people to maybe use the word "don't care," because I think that's like a natural maybe assumption that, well, it's not information that you're even taking in, so you probably don't care or whatever. But I'll tell you, when I unplugged Pastor Heather's lights because I had to rewire it, I had to rewire electronics up there, and I got rid of her lights. And she came in and goes, "Where are my lights?" Oh, I was mortified. I don't want to get your lights out of here. I want you to have your lights. So we care. We really do actually care. We may not know a thing. Like that was information. I didn't know that that was a little bit of information I didn't have that would have turned that tree off. Oh, we flipped it right back on because we're going to do that, right? We care. We do care. So if we impede on your art, please throw something at me. I mean, we want to fix. But really, it's just it's the, we may not understand like we may not have like an actual understanding of the color purple. We may know the movie plot, but it's still, things are valuable, and I think it's just kind of, you see what what one person, Christina is very visual. She can, I mean, I've heard her have hugely philosophical discussions about, Pink Floyd covers, because they are quite, they're pieces of art. And so she's had these discussions with people that I can't necessarily have. I don't feel left out in a way because I'm a kind of a synesthete, so I can kind of imagine, the idea of like shapes blending into things, and it's a melting clock, like a Salvador Dali painting. Okay, well, we can kind of, we don't know what that looks like, but I think you can kind of get a sort of an outline. And now that we have like description in all kinds of television and movies, you sort of learn certain patterns, that are like, apparent, where like, a dissolve from one thing to another. You can't really replicate that as a blind person. You're going to try if you were using software, but you're not going to know. But you're going to know, like, hey, that's sort of the pathway that goes, where those those photos are going to dissolve into this, and that's a slideshow, and this is a vertical wipe. And so there are things that it's kind of like, it's sort of an outline, and so we are listening, so I think ask. Yeah, that's really kind of it's all good. It really is.
All right, I think we have one more question. Greg?
Yep. This is Greg. You've touched on this a little bit already, and I think this falls more on the practical side. Alan, you found a way to walk from your hotel here. So I'm curious, what are things that cities do and we can do as a church to assist in your navigation? Or what are things that are become barriers?
Somebody told me this morning that you're seeking a grant for architectural rework here, so I see the relevance of the question. Unfortunately, different disabilities often will conflict in terms of what they need. For example, this city has scads of curb cuts. Curb cuts are great for people with wheelchairs. They're terrible for blind people, particularly blind people with a dog, because you won't have any idea. The way I got here this morning is I had a friend watching through a set of glasses I was wearing through my phone, who could tell me what was going on and where I was, but she had to tell me when the streets were there. So I'm not saying this is a complaint. I'm saying don't make the mistake of being unhappy if it isn't perfect, and do the best you. There's a term that gamblers like to use called resulting, and what it means is that if you make a decision and it turns out badly, you say, I did a bad thing. No, you did the best you could with that information. It may not always work out perfectly. Some of us read Braille. The majority of the blind population don't. So, having Braille on wall things is useful, but having Braille like in your for your bulletin and your song lyrics and stuff probably would not be practical. So I love your focus on practical, and I think the ADA physical barriers is a good place to look for guidance as you're doing rebuilding. And I think that beyond that, it's the individual who is going to need different things depending on who that individual is. If they read Braille, if they don't, and that's pretty much all I can say about that. It's a complicated question, and this is a complicated time to be a church, and particularly a church that's probably not super well funded.
So, let's just use this church. I can pretty much find most anything on this floor specifically. I get lost as heck downstairs. And I don't know if it's that there's stuff along the walls. We're going to go real specific. You asked a specific question, you're going to get a specific answer. I don't know if it's stuff along the walls. I know during Advent, when we had the Advent candles up here, I was very cautious walking around the edge of the stage because I knew that it was there, but that also meant that I walked that much slower. I already walk slow, but again, this is all part of being a church, and we just kind of have to know. So maybe if stuff makes a drastic change, like, one day we walk in and the stage is back there, you should probably tell us. Obviously, that's extreme, but if there is something of note that maybe you think, well, I did put the Christ candle or whatever right by the steps going up where Kevin and Christina go. Maybe I should just say something. Just be cautious that, there's a candle there. Okay.
Kevin still might fall off the deck.
Yeah, this is true. He might still fall off the deck. But, but also, guys, it's a weird line to walk because, how much information is too much? How much starts to look like panic because the blind people are walking in? And we don't want that either. We don't want you guys to feel panic. We don't want you guys to feel like, oh my gosh, they're going to walk into the thing. It's okay if we walk into things. If it's something really important, like a flame, let us know. But if it's like, oh, I don't know, like you put a chair there, we can hit a chair. I promise it's okay. We're not going to break. And, it's a combination of letting us pinball around and a combination of pointing out maybe the bullet points. Like I know where the storage room is next to the stage. I found it on my own, but I could have asked and you guys would have shown me. I know that to be true. So, that's what it is. Just work together. That's what we're here for. That's what all of us are here for, right? As community, we work together and we grow and get stronger. That's my biggest answer, I guess.
If you ever see your mausoleum of a music storeroom back there have neatly stacked music stands, it's her fault. She made me do it. She's like, you're going to stack those. We're going to make sure those are nice. We're going to get the kid out of here. We're not going to leave this looking like she's great. But we almost did fall off the deck, actually, here. We rented the building for a moonshot rehearsal, and that we had to bring in an entire, 4,000 watts of PA and make sure everything worked. We just needed a space to do it in. And there's one side of the step that's kind of a cutout wedge. If you did step wrong, and it's kind of it's a minor, like the odds would have to not be in your favor for you to step wrong. Well, the odds almost were not in my favor. I was coming down and using a cane and talking to Rom and doing things, and it's literally just a piece of information that we didn't have, and he had to do the yank back from the precipice. And they showed it to me, and he's like, look, this is like a wedge that's cut out. It's like, and so anything's possible, and it would have been, I believe a sighted person could have done the same thing. I mean, this is why we joke and say, well, that's a sobriety checkpoint. So, I mean, anything's possible. And I think, it's like, when you guys do the building, we'll be thinking about, some kind of elevator, thing to be able to get up. Because I think the freight elevator is we think it works like on the waxing, waning third moon of July. I do know this to be true, and then I know Kip was complaining about it too in a funny way. So it's one of those weird things where, but I mean, be able to, we're just inviting people to the table, but actually like providing the right chair, and then asking if the chair needs to be pulled out for them, I think is really kind of, if we invite people to the table, I got to do the same thing, because what happens if I get into a conversation with somebody who's deafblind? I don't have to be afraid of that conversation, because it's not like I'm like, well, how would it be to be in a world of darkness and silence? It's more like, okay, I got to make sure that I need to make sure that if I'm communicating with this person, I can communicate with them where they can communicate as an equal. That's what I'm worried about. But see, I have the perspective of like years of having to figure out different ways of communicating. And so I have asked like deafblind folks that I know, like, hey, if we were hanging out like at a convention or something, how does that work? Do we have a braille display that we type back and forth? I mean, there's every workaround in the book. And so I just asked this individual, like, how would that work? And it would be like, well, you just text me, I can speak back to you, and that's how we do it. And it would be not a, well, that's fascinating. It would be like, well, this person has told me what kind of chair would be most comfortable at the table, and how and when or if that chair needs to be pulled out for them. And it's like, yeah, just send me a text, I'll be able to talk to you. And so I think, when we do when we think about the building and things, I think we'll probably, there are some, things that will, who knows? I mean, maybe we can make a little bit straighter edge stage so Reeves doesn't fall off the deck, because odds are not always in his favor, and he always ends up volunteering his tribute. It's just the way that works. Just the way that it works.
Okay. On that note, just kidding. Thank you all so much. I'm hearing. I love how open you all are, and for us to ask you questions. I'm hearing that, and I heard that in our conversation too. Just if you have questions, feel like you can ask them, please, because they are human beings, right? We're all human beings. We all can relate to each other as equals in the image of God, and so don't be afraid to ask questions. To ask, like, do you need help? Yes, and they can say yes, or they could say no, right? Like, they will tell you. And it made me think of, Alan's story of talking about Jesus and the blind man. I'm pretty sure that's the story where Jesus first asked the blind man, what do you want me to do for you? So Jesus doesn't come in and be like, you need healing, right? You want to be made to see. Like, Jesus respects this person's dignity and says, what do you want from me? I think we can do the same for each other. So thank you, Kevin, Christina, Alan, for your vulnerability, for sharing some difficult things, and even Christina sharing about the service on Wednesday. I think that's a vulnerable thing to share, but that's helpful for us, right? Like that models like we are gonna make mistakes. We're not always gonna get it right. None of us do. All of us. We try things, and sometimes they work, and sometimes they don't, and that's okay. There's grace. That's what we are here for in the church, to give grace to one another, and so we'll just keep that in mind too as we move forward in this conversation. This conversation is not over. So if you have burning questions or you're just thinking, and that's good. We're going to keep the conversation going. I do have some books in the back if you're interested in looking at on the table. The ones that are not numerous are books from my class that you can kind of page through, and if you want to borrow them, you can feel free to do that. I'll put this one back there. This has a really good chart, the Demystifying Disability. If you're wondering about like things to say or not say, it has like a whole section like say this, but don't say this, which I find really was helpful. And then My Body is Not a Prayer Request. Christina was talking about that book. There are 10 free copies in the back. So feel free to take one and read it. And Amy Kenny, the author, she was at the January series last year? This past year? 2 years ago? And she spoke at Calvin, and we can get her recording, and we're going to be playing that recording sometime next month, probably like in mid-April. We still have to choose a date, but it'll be another Sunday evening. And so we'll come together and we'll watch that, and then maybe we'll have a little debrief afterwards. So if you want to be reading her book before then, or you don't have to fully finish it, or even after then, I'll have these books available. So, and I'm pretty sure I can get like an audio version too, if that would be helpful. So I guess I'll say a prayer to end us. All right. Holy Spirit, we thank you for your presence here in this place. Thank you for Kevin and Christina and Alan and their willingness to come and share their stories with us, to share their experience and their thoughts and the experiences of their friends, even bringing that pain into the room. We pray that you would bless their vulnerability in that way. May it change us. May it change our ways that we see people and interact with people. May we see people as you do. May we see people as made in your image, just as we are. God, we're all broken. We all have things that we struggle with. Some are more visible, some are less visible. All of us, God, need your help and your grace. And even as a church, we need you. So we pray that you would just stay in this place with us, in our hearts, and in this neighborhood, and in all of the work that we do here and that we do when we go out from here. And may we just live into your kingdom. May your kingdom come where everyone has a seat at the table and everyone has what they need at that table to have their voices heard. And thank you for that model of a table that you give to us. Be with us in this night as we go into our weeks. We pray in your name. Amen.